we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being.
And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America. For the first time in the history of our country, a majority of our people believe that the next 5 years will be worse than the past 5 years.
It is a sapping of confidence across our land, a nagging fear that America's decline is inevitable, that the next generation must lower its sights.
We are going through the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression.
I don't come before you today as a politician, a banker, or even a wealthy CEO. I am simply a U.S. citizen and one of many small business entrepreneurs who is proud to be a capitalist in this great country we like to call America. Hi, my name is Ray Griggs. Like most Americans, I have dreams and aspirations I would like to achieve in my lifetime, not only for myself, but also for my children and grandchildren. Having grown up overseas most of my childhood, I recognize many freedoms and privileges that Americans enjoy that citizens of other countries only dream of having, and pardon me for saying, but sometimes we Americans take those freedoms for granted. The media no longer holds the government accountable for its actions, and Hollywood liberals steadily come out with the films criticizing the very system they profit from. I felt that I could no longer continue to sit and watch our country head down a path of ever-growing government, a mounting national debt, with the certain loss of freedom that follows. This country has always been about securing our God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Isn't it time to recapture the true American spirit?
We have every right to dream heroic dreams. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans.
My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference.
Americans are and always have been dreamers and builders and seekers of new frontiers. Ronald Reagan believed in our ability to reach for the sky. Now, two versions of the American dream stand in sharp contrast. One views the money you earn as yours. The other believes an elite group in Washington knows best how to spend it, and they will always want more of your money. Let's take a trip back to the nation's capital to take a better look at these two views. Reagan knew that capitalism was the greatest creator of hope and prosperity of any economic system in history. Listen to the words he spoke in front of the Capitol when the nation was at a time of economic crisis.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. It is no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives that result from unnecessary and excessive growth of government.
Now listen to Barack Obama from the same spot.
Now, there are some who question the scale of our ambitions, who suggest that our system cannot tolerate too many big plans. The question we ask today is not whether our government is too big or too small, but whether it works.
How America chooses between these two views of the role that the federal government should play in our lives will have everything to do with the future that we and our children and our children's children will enjoy.
Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Well, I am the government and I'm really busy now. You have no idea how hard it is to be president.
I always like to say, politics is not a bad profession. If you succeed, there are many rewards. If you disgrace yourself, you can always write a book. So, what you doing here?
I'm redistributing the wealth. I learned in school spreading the wealth is good for everyone.
Well, I learned from real life that it's not. What about the guy you're taking money from?
Okay, so it's good for 75% of the people. Isn't taking money from one person to make 3 others happy a good thing?
No, it's a very bad thing. In fact, there's a word for it. It's called theft.
But it will better the lives of 3/4 of the people.
Actually, it will make life worse for 100% of the people. And we call that socialism.
I can't stand how all you conservatives say socialism, like it's a dirty word.
That's funny. I feel the same way about how you liberals use the word capitalism. How about giving me 5 minutes and let me tell you a story, Jelly Bean?
No thanks. I'm good.
Well, they're mine and I'm happy to share some.
That's all right, Ron. As I see it, I'm already entitled to at least half of them.
That's a good one. Not long ago, there was a college professor in Texas, and he...
Oh, can you make it Southern Methodist? I'm gonna have me a presidential library there one day.
Sure.
Yeah, right. When I'm president, I'm gonna have the biggest presidential library in history.
Yeah, because yours is gonna be the only one with an adults-only section. Oh, gosh. I just cracked myself up.
So, the professor was teaching one day when one of his students came up with what he thought was a brilliant idea.
Professor, on behalf of the entire class, I would like to go on record and say that socialism works. It gets rid of the upper and lower class. No one is rich and no one is poor. We would all work hard and we would share everything.
Oh, man. Yeah, go us.
Sounds wonderful. We'll be able to have private jets, right?
Don't think it'll work very well.
I feel what you're both saying, and I love you for it. You are both very intelligent women.
You pig!
Ow! It wasn't me.
Socialism, huh? All right, let's do a little experiment. All grades will be averaged for the next test, and everyone will receive the same grade.
Oh, that sounds good. I mean, the best students will still have pretty good grades, and now nobody will feel like a failure.
Read my lips. No one will be a failure. Right, son?
You got it, Pop.
This is great news. I better text my buddy Carl. Red Rover, Red Rover. No need to send those answers over.
Yeah, you probably would have got caught anyway. I wish I had that on tape.
So the time came to put the experiment to the test. It didn't seem like much changed. Maybe 1 or 2 had doubts.
A very good question. Very direct, and I'm not gonna answer it.
Here, I smoked it, but I never inhaled.
I know. You're not a criminal, right?
I have inhaled and exhaled everything.
Well, class, the results are in. Everyone got a B.
What?
All right, go us!
Bill, this is all your fault. I demand a recount.
Hey, this is perfect. My average just went up. No child left behind, right?
What are you discussing? I'm very confused.
The students who had studied hard were upset, while the students who had studied very little were happy. But when the next test rolled around, the students who had studied little studied even less. And the ones who had studied hard decided, since they couldn't make an A, they wanted a free ride. So they also studied less. The second test average was a D. No one was happy. When the third test rolled around, the average grade was an F.
I like the color red because it's a fire, and I always see myself as being on fire.
The scores never increased as bickering, blame, name-calling all resulted in hard feelings. And no one would study for anyone else. To their great surprise, all students failed.
If you think I have worked all these years to let Herb ride on my coattails,
I did not cause this. This is not my fault.
I can't make a B on my own.
You see, class, socialism doesn't lift the bottom up. it tears everyone else down.
That was a stupid idea. I could have told you that on tape. Wait, I think I did.
Who came up with this idea anyway?
I'll tell you who came up with it. The new kid.
Ooh, let's get him.
Let me be clear.
Get him!
Never mind.
So, what did you think, Chief?
Interesting story, but I don't see it the same way.
Well, just remember, government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives or steal their ambition and dreams. A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take away everything you have.
Call it big government or socialism, the problem is still the same.
Margaret Thatcher said it brilliantly. The problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. I read a book years ago, and the name of the book is called Why Democracies Perish, and it was written not by some conservative Republican. It was written by a French communist named Jean-Francois Revel. And here was the essence of the book. Here's what he said. That democracies perish when people begin to understand that they can vote for themselves largesse out of the public treasury. And once they begin to recognize they have the ability to take other people's possessions and vote it for themselves, they will begin to do that increasingly to the point that they take more out than they've put in. It shouldn't take a genius to figure out that if you draw more water out of a cup than you've placed in the cup, there's a deficit.
To understand where the Democrats' big government plans are going, we need to take a quick look to where they've already been. Barack Obama's philosophy didn't just appear out of thin air. It's actually a part of a long line of liberal thinking in American politics. Regretfully, every 20 or 30 years since the Great Depression, we've gone back towards big government politics and had to learn the same lessons over again. It's always repackaged as something new. Change. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt and an overwhelmingly Democratic Congress passed an array of federal programs called the New Deal. Roosevelt and the Democrats argued that capitalism as we knew it had failed the people, leaving the federal government as the only institution left to step in. Franklin Roosevelt ultimately had a very socialistic view of America, which sought to guarantee certain outcomes for everyone, regardless of how much they worked. He wanted to create a utopian society free from want.
A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed.
Though Roosevelt wasn't successful in establishing his utopian society where everyone was guaranteed a job, home, food, clothing, and health care, the foundation for big government had been laid.
Well, one of the things that I find so frustrating is how the left has rewritten the history books and written a fairy tale about what's actually happened in American history. And one of my favorite examples of this is the New Deal. Everyone thinks the New Deal was a great success, right? Franklin Roosevelt, all the programs that saved the economy during the Great Depression. Well, the reality is a little bit different from that fairy tale. If you look at the statistics, Franklin Roosevelt was elected president in 1932 during the depths of the Great Depression. He took office in 1933, launched the New Deal, and all of these new programs, we doubled the amount of spending. We doubled the national debt over those years, and this was supposed to put America back to work, right? But the most amazing thing is 8 years later, by 1940, right on the eve of World War II, 8 years after we had put in place the New Deal, you know, the unemployment rate in the United States was still 15%. That would be like 50% more Americans being unemployed than are today, and yet we still label the New Deal a success.
In the summer of 1939, President Roosevelt's Treasury Secretary, Henry Morgenthau, testified before a congressional hearing that in terms of creating jobs, the New Deal had been a failure and had doubled the national debt in just over 6 years. Does any of this sound familiar? The aftermath of World War II left much of the industrial world in rubble, and the United States as the last man standing to supply the world's goods. The economy exploded. Under President Harry Truman, the federal government finally showed some surpluses for the first time since before Franklin Roosevelt took office. Then, during the 50s, President Eisenhower insisted on fiscal restraint, and with a roaring economy, the U.S. enjoyed more budget surpluses. Times were good, and the nation's baby population boomed. We then moved into the 60s, and John Kennedy became president.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
President Kennedy realized we were losing our competitive advantage in the world. He proposed tax cuts to get the country moving again.
It will include an across-the-board, top-to-bottom cut in both corporate and personal income taxes. The billions of dollars this bill will place in the hands of the consumer and our businessmen will have both immediate and permanent benefits to our economy.
When I'm 8 years old, my dad made a promise to me. He says, when a president cuts my taxes, I'll give you a larger allowance. And in 1960, John Kennedy, who the Democrats would not even renominate today. If John Kennedy were alive today, he would not be a Democrat. He would not even be in a position to get the nomination of the party. That's how much has changed. But John Kennedy lowered my father's taxes in 1960. My dad raised my allowance from $1 to $5.
The 60s were a time of rapid economic growth, which was a boom to the federal treasury. However, Kennedy's successor, Lyndon Johnson, was about to pledge America to ending poverty by spreading the wealth around.
And I urge this Congress and all Americans to join with me in that effort.
What failed about the war on poverty was the notion that the government had the capacity, the knowledge, the legitimate authority to transform attitudes, ways of life, ways in which people conducted themselves.
The entitlement mentality kicked into full gear, and welfare programs were greatly expanded. By taxing the rich and giving it to the poor, we would become a great society.
It doesn't help the very people that we say we want to help. I lived on welfare. I understand the rules of welfare. They were do not work, do not save, do not get married, and we'll keep you enslaved to this poverty plantation. You know, to develop out a great society and a war on poverty where the rules are against the very things that you need to do to become self-sufficient, to become mainstreamed, we need to revisit and say, are we making a mistake?
Ronald Reagan, before he entered into politics, spoke out against this welfare mentality.
Not too long ago, a judge called me here in Los Angeles. He told me that a young woman who'd come before him for a divorce. She had 6 children, was pregnant with her 7th. Under his questioning, she revealed her husband was a laborer earning $250 a month. She wanted the divorce to get an $80 raise. She's eligible for $330 a month in the Aid to Dependent Children program. She got the idea from 2 women in her neighborhood who'd already done that very thing. Yet any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals.
We lived for the early part of my childhood in that public housing community, but my dad, you know, never saw our low-income status as anything but a temporary state of being. And he would never allow us to say we're poor. He said poverty and to say that you're poor is a state of mind. Say low income because that's only a temporary state of your pocketbook.
As the 60s gave way to the 70s, the full weight of high taxes and big government came to bear on the country.
In the 1970s, at the end of the Carter administration, President Carter himself said that the nation was in a period of malaise. Now, obviously, there were a lot of problems, and that was the fact that we had high inflation, we had very high interest rates, we had high unemployment, and we had a stagnant economy, as well as a shortage of energy. And we had something that the economists said wasn't possible of happening, and that was stagflation.
Stagflation occurs when you have rising unemployment and rising inflation. It's the worst of both worlds. Under the models of centralized planning put forward by people like Galbraith and Keynes, that was never supposed to happen. But it did in the 1970s, and we're on a track to have it happen again.
All the legislation in the world can't fix what's wrong with America. We've always had a faith that the days of our children would be better than our own. Our people are losing that faith, not only in government itself, but in the ability as citizens to serve as the ultimate rulers and shapers of our democracy. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning.
In the midst of all this malaise, people became interested in recapturing America's founding ideals and that can-do attitude.
Ronald Reagan had already been expressing this interest for years. Listen to his own words in a 1964 speech called A Time for Choosing.
And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course.
15 years later, Reagan and the nation had seen enough of big government programs, and they were ready for a change. Former governor of California announced his intentions to seek the presidency.
I cannot and will not stand by and see this great country destroy itself. Our leaders attempt to blame their failures on circumstances beyond their control, on false estimates by unknown, unidentifiable experts who rewrite modern history in an attempt to convince us our high standard of living, the result of thrift and hard work, is somehow selfish extravagance, which we must renounce as we join in sharing scarcity. I don't agree that our nation must resign itself to inevitable decline, yielding its proud position to other hands. I am totally unwilling to see this country fail in its obligation to itself and to the other free peoples of the world.
Ronald Reagan hit the campaign trail in his quest to restore America back to its founding principles of limited government and individual initiative.
A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his.
A commitment to unemployment compensation, the minimum wage, welfare, national health insurance, those kinds of commitments that have typified the Democratic Party since ancient history in this country's political life.
The president's economic plan calls for increasing the taxes to the point that we finally take so much money away from the people that we can balance the budget in that way. But we will have a very poor nation and a very unsound economy if we follow that path.
This is a contest between a Democrat and the mainstream of my party, as exemplified by the actions that I've taken in the Oval Office the last 4 years, as contrasted with Governor Reagan, who in most cases does typify his party, but in some cases there is a radical departure by him from the heritage of Eisenhower and others.
There you go again. I would like to have a crusade today, and I would like to lead that crusade with your help, and it would be one to take government off the backs of the great people of this country and turn you loose again to do those things that I know you can do so well because you did them and made this country great.
The American people shared Reagan's views, including his belief that they, far better than the federal government, could right the ship of state. Reagan won in a landslide victory, carrying a whopping 44 of the 50 states. By comparison, in his election, Barack Obama won 28. President Reagan came in with a mandate to fundamentally change America, and he set out to do just that.
It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
More good news came election night and boosted the prospect that Reagan would be able to implement some of the conservative principles that he ran under. Republicans gained control of the Senate. For the first time since the 1950s, the American people had spoken. They were unhappy about the failed policies of President Carter and the Democratic Congress. Many Democratic legislators knew they needed to play ball or lose their seats, as so many of their colleagues just had.
My message to you tonight is, put on your work shoes. We're still on the job.
So Reagan came in and dramatically lowered the tax rates in the United States, which were still at 70% top rate when he became president. And he steadily brought it down. And the result was a tremendous boom. But he combined the tax cuts with two other things. He really dramatically reduced regulation. There was a lot less red tape on business when Reagan was president. And he was a cheerleader for entrepreneurship. He liked business people. He liked entrepreneurs. He liked small business. And he made people feel good about going into business.
The biggest problem that Ronald Reagan faced in 1981 was a feeling on the part of the American people who had to just keep on doing what we had been doing. In other words, they'd become so accustomed to the welfare state, to certain entitlements, that they'd lost confidence in themselves and be able to pull themselves out of the crisis in which they found themselves. Reagan's great genius was to say, no, our best days are not behind us, they're in front of us, to instill once again confidence in the American people.
We're back in California at the Reagan Ranch. It's at this very location in the summer of 1981 Ronald Reagan signed the largest tax cut in American history.
Right there at the ranch, the table at the ranch, which was great, did in front of the media. They were all there. It was a foggy, foggy day, but he did it. And he did it because he was able to work with the Democrats on Capitol Hill. He was able to do something today nobody seems to be able to do. He was able to build that coalition to lower taxes for each and every one of us, which turned the economy around and gave us the great growth, not only in the 80s, but going into the 90s because of the tax cuts of 1983.
Ronald Reagan understood. So what he did was he gave the American people tax cuts, and it worked like a charm. And in fact, he gave us, I think, over 90 months of consecutive economic growth.
Unemployment fell in half to under 5%, inflation to 4.8%. The poverty rate shrank, and real incomes rose. Overall, the Reagan economy created 17 million new jobs. That's roughly 2 million per year.
President Reagan's economic policies were effective at stimulating growth because he recognized government can't create growth. Government can create conditions for people to create growth.
President Reagan sought to curtail the Democrats and other big spenders in Congress by taking his case directly to the people during this 1984 re-election campaign speech.
You know, we could say they spend like drunken sailors. But that would be unfair to drunken sailors because the sailors are spending their own money.
By the way, Ronald Reagan won that election with 49 states to Walter Mondale's 1.
Ronald Reagan was the most successful of any president from World War II up until the time that he took office in reducing or slowing the growth of federal spending. This was despite the fact that the House of Representatives was in Democratic hands all of the time that he was president, and the Senate was for a quarter of the time that he was president.
Many great companies were created in the pro-business climate, which encouraged entrepreneurs to try new ideas. Apple Computers and Microsoft really took off in the 80s. The dot-com revolution would follow in the 90s. Two critiques against Ronald Reagan are that his economic policies only benefited the wealthiest Americans, and the national debt increased substantially. President Obama referenced these in his 2008 campaign against John McCain, taking a swipe at the philosophy of smaller government and lower taxes.
For over 2 decades, he subscribed to that old discredited Republican philosophy. Give more and more to those with the most and hope that prosperity trickles down to everyone else.
Well, when the president suggests that President Reagan or President Bush somehow gave tax cuts to only the wealthy at the expense of everybody else, he really is engaging in demagoguery, and I don't use the word lightly. They were across the board. There was no American family that paid federal income taxes that did not get a tax cut under the Reagan tax cut program that was put into place.
We celebrate the right of each individual to be recognized as unique, possessed of dignity and the sacred right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At the same time, with our independence, goes a generosity of spirit more evident here than in almost any other part of the world.
They called it the Reagan Revolution. Well, I'll accept that. But for me, it always seemed more like the great rediscovery. A rediscovery of our values and our common sense. So we cut the people's tax rates, and the people produced more than ever before. The economy bloomed like a plant that had been cut back and could now grow quicker and stronger. Our economic program brought about the longest peacetime expansion in our history. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Every president after Reagan, by and large, followed his economic philosophies until Obama.
One exception was the first 2 years of Bill Clinton's presidency. He ran as a New Democrat, then proceeded to steer the country towards that same old far-left big government course.
Let us resolve to make our government a place for what Franklin Roosevelt called bold, persistent experimentation.
This change of direction led to the Republican Revolution of 1994.
1994 was a reaction to Bill Clinton's first 2 years in office. When he became president, instead of acting the moderate that he had campaigned as, he was very radical in his policies. So the Republicans under Newt Gingrich came up with very specific, policy-oriented solutions to some of the most pressing problems that we were facing as a nation. And as a result, they swept into office. Republicans took over Congress.
In 1994, the Republicans came together with a very positive program called the Contract with America, which included balancing the budget, reforming welfare, cutting taxes, fundamentally reforming the federal government. When I was Speaker, we controlled federal spending. We reformed welfare, we reformed Medicare, we cut spending and we cut out waste in government. The result was, in the 4 years I was Speaker, federal spending went up annually by 2.9% a year, including all the entitlements, 2.9% a year. It's the lowest rate of increase since Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s. Because we controlled spending, we got to a balanced budget. We paid off $405 billion in federal debt over 4 years while cutting taxes because we controlled spending.
With the Republicans controlling Congress and a more restrained Bill Clinton in the White House, the country charted a center-right course through the rest of the 90s. The number of Americans on welfare dropped from 4.4 million to 1.9 million. This goes to show the best anti-poverty program is a job.
There were already stirrings for change when George W. Bush won the 2000 presidential election over Al Gore, but not without controversy.
Many felt divided over the election results. But the terrorist attacks of 9/11 united the country.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Americans began to rally behind the efforts of Bush to protect the nation. Unfortunately, his economic policies were not so good. He got half the Reagan equation right, the need for tax cuts to spur economic growth. But he and the Republican Congress missed the other half, control spending. Spending went up more under Bush than any other president in the last 40 years, due mostly to the war in Iraq. The total federal budget increased by $1 trillion from 2001 to 2006.
That's pretty big.
President George W. Bush did right only in 2003 when they reduced tax rates substantially, and also especially on capital gains and on dividends. They also reduced personal income tax rates took out things like reduced the marriage penalty. Overall, a pretty good tax bill. But after that, it was downhill.
It was a tumultuous time, as you know, from 2003 to 2006. It was a tough time for Republicans. It was a time when Republicans were sort of abandoning their conservative principles, trying to moderate their tone so much so that they became indistinguishable from Democrats.
It was no shock that we lost the House in '06. I predicted that about a year and a half out. The problem was they were spending at a rate that allowed everybody, all the Republican base, who, whatever their differences, are fiscal conservatives, to say, hell, these guys are no better than the Democrats.
Now it was the Democrats speaking out about fiscal responsibility in the campaign of 2006. They took back Congress.
After years of historic deficits, this 110th Congress will commit itself to a higher standard. Pay as you go, no new deficit spending. Our new America will provide unlimited opportunity for future generations, not burden them with mountains of debt.
During the Democrats' first 2 years in charge, the deficit went from $160 to over $400 billion. The spending was so great that President Bush broke out his veto pen for the first time in his presidency.
I kept my promise by vetoing it.
Then came the mortgage meltdown and the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009.
Starting in the early 90s under the Clinton administration, the federal government massively expanded its subsidies to try to get lower-income Americans into buying homes that, frankly, they could not afford. The other big problem was the central bank. The Federal Reserve artificially pushed interest rates down early in this decade, way too low, and that encouraged all these fly-by-night mortgage companies to go out and offer these absurdly low mortgage rates. Ultimately, those low interest rates could not be sustained, and when they started rising, again, people could not afford the mortgage payments, and that's why we have this housing crisis.
This crisis sealed the election for Obama. It also swept even more Democrats into office, so that they now controlled both the House and the Senate. The Democrats sought to capitalize on the sense of fear in the land. Obama's new chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, said such a crisis creates an opportunity.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
With the stars aligned for Obama, he set out to recut America's economic pie. No one should be surprised at Obama and the Democratic Congress's agenda. He laid it all out there during the campaign.
Well, the reason why I asked you about the American dream, I mean, I've worked hard. I'm a plumber. You know, I work, 10, 12 hours a day.
Absolutely.
And I'm, buying this company, and I'm going to continue to work that way. Now, if I buy another truck and add something else to it and, build the company, I'm getting taxed more and more for fulfilling the American dream.
It's not that I want to punish your success. I think when you spread the wealth around, it's good for everyone.
President Obama took that to mean, okay, we want to move to socialism, where we tax you if you're successful and give you money if you're not successful, so you'll be dependent on us. Fundamentally, the American people know that doesn't work.
There's this clash between these two models again, the redistribution model and the wealth creation model. The redistribution model does not expand wealth, does not expand opportunity. It just takes from one group and gives to another. Every time we've taken that approach, what we've seen is a slowdown in economic expansion in this country. Do we want to go down that path again?
A lot of people voted for Obama because they thought he did represent hope and change. Well, they had no clue as to what the change was. And what they imagined it to be was sort of this vague anti-establishment concern they had with, ironically, with big government, with big business, with corruption. I mean, they were sold a real bill of goods.
One of the reasons I think a lot of young people are so intrigued and supportive, at least they have been in the past, of President Obama and what many call his socialist policies that are up and coming is because of the branding and the messaging that the Obama administration uses and that many on his side use to make it look cool, to make it look hip, to make it look fun.
I've watched President Obama now for about 2 years. He's a very articulate, very charming person. The difference is Reagan used clarity to teach you things that you could verify in the world. And so the longer Reagan talked, the stronger his program became. The more people said, you know, that's right. Obama uses eloquence to hide what he's really doing, because he knows the more people understand it, the more they'll be opposed to it.
Yeah, I grew up in the 70s and early 80s. The President and I, according to him, both came of age under Ronald Reagan. Unfortunately, the President seems to have taken a vastly different view of what worked and what didn't. The reason I'm a Republican is largely because of the practical nature of us Midwesterners. We saw what Carter did and it didn't work. We saw what Reagan did and it did work. We had prosperity and we saw the end of an evil empire. So we all take our own lessons from history, but I would suggest the President go back and re-examine that period of time and understand again that the prosperity of the American people comes from their own hard work and ingenuity, not from the hand of a federal bureaucrat and their own centralized planning.
No, it's this fatal conceit that the progressive have, that somehow government can make the decisions for 300 million Americans, making 5,000 decisions. I mean, that's how many billions of decisions. It's impossible. It's a fatal conceit of the liberal, of the progressive, and of the socialist. And it's the kind of fatal conceit that can lead to a disaster.
I would say Obama's economic and domestic policies have been disastrous, and they ruinous, really, if they're allowed to continue. They are arrogant and patronizing. When you look at the government knows best philosophy that he's applied, and really all of his domestic policies are and they embody what Barack Obama believes, what the left believes, that government does know best, that government is somehow efficient and capable. I think back to what Milton Friedman said when if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, within 5 years there would be a shortage of sand.
I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a brief history lesson. The U.S. Post Office was established in 1775. So they've had over 235 years to make it work. It's broke. Social Security was established in 1935. They've had over 75 years to make it work. It's broke. Fannie Mae was established in 1938. They've had over 72 years to make it work. It's broke. Medicare and Medicaid were established in 1965. They've had over 45 years to make it work. They are both broke. Cash for clunkers in 2009 went broke after 80% of the cars purchased turned out to be produced by foreign companies. The $787 billion stimulus bill? You be the judge.
We take it for granted that you can go to a foreign country, stick a piece of plastic in the wall, and cash will come out. And you can give the same piece of plastic to a total stranger who doesn't even speak English. He'll rent you a car for a week. And when you get home, Visa, MasterCard, whoever will have the accounting correct to the penny. Government can't even count the votes accurately.
Are you beginning to understand why less and not more is better? Under the newest big government entitlement program, Obamacare, Medicaid will be greatly expanded in order to cover millions of people across the country. The federal government provides 100% of the funding for the expansion to the states for the first few years, and then shrinks it to 90% at the end of this decade.
Unfortunately, what the federal government tends to do is they start the process, they pay for the first few years, and then they back out and they leave the states on the hook. A perfect example, most people will probably remember, during the Clinton administration, President Clinton talked about 100,000 police officers on the street. Great idea. I think more police officers is a great thing. The federal government started to pay for that, but after 3 years, the feds backed out. The state and the locals were on the hook for sustaining the program. And people, unfortunately, people don't ask that question. Great idea. Thanks for funding it initially, but how do we sustain and pay for the program?
So you create a program. It has longevity beyond the amount of money, which then forces that state to have to cough up money out of its own treasury. in order to continue to fund it. If the local government, that state, decides they're not going to fund it, then the governor of that state and the state legislature will be blamed for cutting this wonderful program that did so many good things. It's a no-win situation for those who engage in it.
For the state of Missouri, they're wanting to put on over 400,000 more people onto our Medicaid program. And these are people who earn more than the 20%, all the way up to 133% of the federal poverty level. And these are able-bodied people who are now working. They're able to work. They're not disabled. And so when we put them on to the Medicaid program, it's going to cost about $1 billion. So if you give it to them, then they'll go, oh yeah, I'll take it because it's free. But you're enslaving the other taxpayer who's now having to work and under the penalty of being thrown in jail if they don't pay their taxes. The fruit of their labor is being given to this other person. It's economic slavery, Ray. We should never allow that.
And what about the person paying for these big government programs? Surely he must be remembered.
There you are, old friend. I have another story I was hoping to share with you.
Why can't I just eat my waffle?
Well, don't worry. It's not a foreign policy question. It's about government programs.
Government programs? I can tell you about government programs. From the time they get up in the morning and flush the toilet, the American people are taxed. Then they go and get their cup of coffee and they're taxed. This goes on all day long. Get a car, it's taxed. Go drive to the market, they're taxed. Tax.
Don't mind him. I think he's just feeling the pinch California is in right now because of government programs.
Thanks, Ron, but I gotta tell you, I don't need another story. Okay, it's not really all that hard. If you're walking down the right path and you're willing to keep walking, eventually you'll make progress.
Well, let's talk about that progress.
I knew I wasn't going to get out of this.
Relax. You like stories, especially this one, because it's about you. I call it The Forgotten Man.
Now, Joel the Squirrel, let's not be greedy. There's plenty to go around. Ouch! Oh, an acorn. You've got to love them. Remember, from a tiny acorn, mighty government power grows.
Vanilla or chocolate?
Vanilla.
I know why you selected that flavor, George. It's because the chocolate is black, isn't it?
Well, I just prefer vanilla.
It is time for racial discrimination to be over in America and all across the world, because I scream, you scream, and we all scream for ice cream.
Nancy, I have this wonderful idea of how we can make George W.'s life better, and we can keep the parks clean. It's another government benefit program to cover 4 years of college tuition for George, and he has to complete only 1 year of community service. Do you think we can get support from Congress?
Do I? Hey, Harry, I need the Senate to approve a new bill today, even if I have to call the vote at 3 a.m. Read it? You've never read them before. Why start now? What? Why are you talking to me like the CIA does? Stonewalls and lies. Look, just tell the party we don't need the votes of the Republicans. The news media has a slobbering love affair with the president, so we can create a diversion on the side and pass this through the House and Senate. Great. Ciao.
Wow, that was easier than getting the Nobel Peace Prize. You know my philosophy. Whatever's good at $2 billion has got to be 3 times as good at $6 billion.
It is.
More money for George to go to college, and the park stays clean. But in all of this, there's one person who's not consulted. In my view, he's the most important person of all. The small business owner. The loyal taxpayer who does all the right things. We'll call him Richard. Oh, geez, I'm trying to get some sympathy for the hardworking taxpayer, and the best we've got is Nixon. Heck, I mean, could you at least shave?
Get off my case, bonzo. You think I like it? Historians say I would have beat Kennedy and been president in 1960 if it weren't for this damn 5 o'clock shadow.
Richard has always done the right thing. He worked hard, paid his taxes, and saved for his beautiful daughter Julie to go to college.
Oh, golly. How about some ice cream? That would be just yummy.
Get the chocolate.
Things are already tough for the small businessman these days. All sorts of rules, laws, and mandates. Man, that's bigger than his enemies list.
I heard that.
I can see Russia from here. Oh, wait. That's just a cloud.
Mm-hmm. Someday that girl's gonna be the first woman ever to run for president.
You pig!
It wasn't me.
I ran for president.
See, what did I tell you about taxes? Tax and tax and tax and tax. This goes on all day long. Tax and tax and tax and tax. We will have to make a song.
Meanwhile, Richard, if he'd been able to keep his money, would have experienced zero overhead in helping his daughter go to college because there's no bureaucracy to support. But sadly...
Hey, Tricky Dick, needing to get a paycheck. Maybe I can get an advance on my hour for next week.
Sorry, kid. I'm going to have to let you go. I can't afford to keep you on board.
It will take Richard's federal taxes and likely several others to pay each of those kids to go to college, even though Richard is already sending one, his, to school.
And rarely is the question asked, is our children learning?
Yeah, all these kids get lots of free money for what amounts to a day in the park. But what about Richard? He's been forgotten. There are millions of forgotten men and women who do the right things, work hard, save and scrimp to make the world a better place. But sometimes it's just not enough with big government programs.
Sorry, but just think of the good you've done helping out George.
I'm sorry, Dick, but there's an old saying in Tennessee. I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee too. It says, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, you can't get fooled again." See you later, my amigo.
A wise president once said, "I pledge to you a government that will not only work well, but wisely, its ability to act tempered by prudence, and its willingness to do good balanced by the knowledge that government is never more dangerous than when our desire to have it help us blinds us to its great power to harm us."
You said that.
That's right.
Wow, man. You must have gone to Harvard.
Me? No, I couldn't afford it. I went to Eureka College.
So here is the moral question. Is it better that a group of politicians take our money and dictate how we give, or is it really our responsibility and choice?
Socialism is when I believe the government gets too involved in what they feel is good for the people, and it turns a democracy into a government-run entity.
Government that thinks that they should take care of the people, give everybody welfare, Social Security, do everything for everybody instead of telling them get off their butts and do it themselves.
Well, socialism means other people control your life. They control your destiny. They control the economic means of production. You don't, and you become a cog in a highly centralized, highly planned, and highly ineffective, and I would argue inhumane, governmental system. Where has socialism worked?
Socialism sounds good. We're all going to share things together. We're going to get rid of that evil profit-taking. But it makes everybody poor.
Just think about the basic idea of where they believe in this concept of redistribution of wealth. This is socialism at its best. It's saying, you know what, we're all equal. We're going to ignore the fact that people have different talents and they have different contributions that they can make at different levels in society. We're going to ignore the fact that in these different gifts and talents, some are going to make more economically and some are less. Some are going to require more education, some less. What socialism says is we are just all equal, and we're going to redistribute from those that have and give to the ones that do not have. That concept is a violation of Scripture, for one. That's why you see a lot of religious activity saying we've got to stop this socialist experiment that's happening in our country today, because the religious community understands the 10th commandment. It says don't covet, and socialism is rooted in covetousness. Somebody has something somebody else doesn't have, so we hire politicians to go and take it from them. That's theft. And usually when you talk about the ones that they're taking it from, these are people that have worked hard themselves.
It's definitely the Christian responsibility to help those in need. And the problem when we have this fourth branch of government, which Reagan talks about being the bureaucracy, is that individuals relinquish their responsibility because they know that government is going to take care of everyone. It's not the individual's Christian responsibility to allow their friends and neighbors to become dependent on government. That's not Christian at all.
Economist Arthur Laffer has often warned that there's nothing more portable in this world than money and rich people. When taxes are raised beyond a certain point, you end up watching capital and rich people leave. And then the tax burden falls on the middle class, and the economy begins to implode under the weight because it's often been pointed out, I've never gotten a job from a poor person.
How does a free market economy work on that kind of basis when simply being outvoted means that the people who produce wealth and pay taxes will have that wealth taken from them and redistributed after they're taxed? How does that system work? When more, it's like a seesaw. When more people use taxes than pay them, our economy is going to slide down.
Capitalism, I believe, is based on greed and self-interest. That's what I learned in college. That's what they taught me.
I think it's the power of money, more or less, yeah.
Did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think the communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us.
Remember, Obama's biggest boogeymen of all are the wealthiest Americans who simply were not paying their fair share under Presidents Reagan and George W. Bush.
It turns out that about 2/3 of all the tax returns for the top 1% or so of Americans, the very wealthiest Americans, these are small business owners. These aren't corporate CEOs. They're owners of manufacturing companies out there in mid-America. They're partnerships, and they're small businesses, and that's who the wealthiest Americans are mainly. So when you raise taxes on these people, it means they're going to be able to hire less workers, and they're going to be able to invest less.
So how do we deal with this? First, we need to cut our taxes, not raise them.
What we want to do is create a rising tide of economic growth and prosperity so that everyone's boat rises. And that's not what we're doing right now. We're raising tax rates on the rich higher and higher so they bear a very high share of the taxes. And what's happening as a result is rich people, to some extent, are going on strike. They're basically not working as hard. They're not investing as much. And so America's industry is in decline as a result of this.
So simple flat tax, single rate, generous exemptions for adults and for children, just as an example, family of 4. First $46,000, free of federal income tax, no tax on your savings, no tax when you die. You know, you should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS. If you make above the $46,000, only 17 cents on the dollar gets taxed. You could literally do it on a sheet of paper or even on a postcard. And if you do something like that, both on the personal side and on the business side, you'll see the American economy take off like a rocket.
Let's take a look at a state that has some of the highest taxes in the land and how that's worked out for its people.
California is a case study in a government that simply spent too much and borrowed too much and taxed too much. It's now seeing the biggest population exodus in its history. People are fleeing to states with less regulation and lower taxes. California has now just imposed the biggest tax increase in the history of any state in the nation. And the result, ironically, is they're actually taking in less total revenues after the tax increases than they were before.
They've raised taxes. They've raised regulation. They treat businesses like they're enemies of the state. And so what's happened is rich people and productive people and small businessmen and large businessmen have moved out of California. They can't afford to live there any longer.
The American people have woken up to the fact that California has been run into the ground by radical, economic policies of the left. The state is officially broken, and just because the weather is good, it creates the perception that things are still California, but it is not the Golden State. It's a state where people are now, the U-Hauls are heading into the desert, into 115-degree weather like Arizona, because at least there's pro-business policies there.
Since 2000, California's job growth rate has fallen 20% behind the national average. Further, the state has lost 25% of its industrial workforce since 2001. And during the last decade, California has lost 1.5 million of its population. How did California end up in this mess? In 1999, California Governor Pete Wilson, a Reagan Republican, handed over the state to a newly elected Democratic Governor, Gray Davis, with a $12 billion surplus. Within 4 years, Davis and the Democratic legislature managed to turn that surplus into a $35 billion deficit. Shamefully, California, the 8th largest economy in the world, could not balance its books.
They spent. They did exactly what I had warned him would occur if he did not stop it, which is to say, they spent the surplus, spent every penny that the state was legally entitled to collect, and then spent money they did not have. Then he was recalled.
Arnold Schwarzenegger ran and won on promises to rein in spending and not raise taxes. In short, to improve California's business climate.
I pledge my governorship to your interest, not the special interest.
Schwarzenegger ran right up against government employee unions and other special interests.
In one way, Governor started out very strong and bold. He had a series of initiatives that I believe would have actually changed the direction of California and would have been very positive for California. In hindsight, that might have been a little too much to do all at one time, and the governor then was beat back pretty badly in that process.
Governor Schwarzenegger has tried, but he had the same irresponsible legislature, so it's very tough to do. And he tried, I think, very hard. He made a very good reform in 2004 in terms of workers' compensation. But trying to get them to stop spending is like trying to get an alcoholic to stop drinking.
It's been a very strange experience for me after 22 years in the state legislature to come to the United States Congress and watch the very same policies that I saw destroy California's economy and bankrupt California's finances now being passed one after another here in our nation's capital.
We're dealing with numbers we've really never dealt with before. During Barack Obama's first year in office, the deficit soared past $1 trillion, heights never seen in our nation's entire history, and nearly tripled the previous record shortfall. Well over 1/3 of the entire federal budget was paid with borrowed money. Without tough choices by our nation's leaders, these kind of deficits will continue until our credit runs out.
So over the whole course of our nation's history, debt has reached about this level that we're at today, and our president in about 8 years is going to double it. That's very worrying. But this is the course that we're on in the near term. And when you think about what's underlying that is policies that we have in place that are aimed at our senior citizens. Those are called entitlement policies, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And we're right on the cusp, the leading edge of 77 million baby boomers retiring into those programs. And that is absolutely unsustainable. We are fiscally hemorrhaging, and we need to do something about it.
Here was Barack Obama's promise regarding the federal budget.
Now, many of these plans will cost money, which is why I've laid out how I'll pay for every dime by closing corporate loopholes and tax havens that don't help America grow. But I will also go through the federal budget line by line, eliminating programs that no longer work and making the ones we do need work better and cost less, because we cannot meet 21st century challenges with a 20th century bureaucracy.
The Obama administration and the Democratic Congress' first act of this fiscal responsibility was to pass a $787 billion stimulus bill. It had to be passed before President's Weekend, or the economy faced certain doom.
Well, it's a very short story. The president told the Democratic Congress he wanted to spend $1 trillion with interest. They agreed. They didn't even take the time to read the bill. They passed it into law.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Flying Air Force One to New York City for a photo op, $328,000. Handing out 10,000 Social Security checks to people who are already dead, $2.5 million. Managing the odor of pigs, $1.7 million. Studying the genetic code of grapes, $2.1 million. Looking for space aliens, $9.4 million. Passing the stimulus bill, unread, $787 billion. There are some things that money can't buy, but for these and everything else, there's the federal government card.
And that is why the single most important part of this economic recovery and reinvestment plan is the fact that it will save or create up to 4 million jobs.
Broken down, that's $250,000 per job.
The stimulus plan is one of the great hoaxes of all time. It did not work. Government spending does not create jobs. It just creates debt, and it creates a lot of inflation, and that's what we're seeing right now. And so this $800 billion spending plan that Barack Obama and the Democrats passed in 2009 was a catastrophe.
Well, any stimulus bill is not going to do any real long-term good for an economy, because what does a stimulus bill do? It takes money from some, puts it in the hands of the government that spends it, and hopes that that somehow stimulates the economy. It's been rightly compared to taking a pail of water from one end of a pool or pond and pouring it in the other end. Nice, but it doesn't increase the amount of water in the pool.
And now we face a situation where in 5 or 6 years, the single biggest item in the federal budget, bigger than Medicare, bigger than Social Security, bigger than national defense, interest payments on all of this debt. It's just paying the interest on the debt. I mean, this is craziness. It is fiscal child abuse.
Well, the stimulus money should be turned back to the American public in the form of tax cuts. As Ronald Reagan proved, that tax cuts is the way to stimulate the economy. It's the real way. It's not a cash for clunker program. That's not a way to really and truly stimulate the economy. It's cutting the wage earners' taxes, getting government off their back so they can purchase things, and the more they purchase, the more people work.
The president was quick to cast blame on his predecessor for the nation's mammoth $1 trillion+ deficit.
That's the story of the first 6 months. It's cost some money to do this. Although I've got to say, when I hear critics talk about out-of-control spending, I start scratching my head. I can't help but remember those same critics contributed to a $1.3 trillion deficit that I inherited when I took office. I mean, seriously. You know, I'm now president, so I'm responsible for solving it, but I do think we shouldn't have a selective memory in terms of spending habits. You hand me a $1.3 trillion bill, and then you're complaining 6 months later because we haven't paid it all back.
So he's complaining about the deficits, but then doubling them, and now with health care tripling, and has plans for unending deficits. That's the problem with it.
What's the true story behind the $1.4 trillion deficit Obama claims he inherited in 2009? Well, let's take a closer look at that. During President Bush's last full year in office in 2008, the federal deficit was $600 billion. Obama steps in and adds quite a bit to next year's budget. First, he and the Democratic Congress passed the stimulus bill, $787 billion, which $242 billion was spent in 2009. Subtract that from the $1.4 trillion, and you get a deficit of around $1.1 trillion. But the Democrats also passed a $410 billion omnibus spending bill. Oh yeah, take off $60 billion for the auto industry. Then there was the $8 billion expansion of the S-chip health insurance program, and another $3 billion for cash for clunkers. And I'm sure I did not find all the new spending, but it's clear that Bush did not leave President Obama a $1.4 trillion deficit. It looks like President Obama and the Democratic Congress more than doubled it. But then again, math was never his strong suit.
We've traveled to every corner of the United States. I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go.
Nancy Pelosi seems even more out of touch with reality regarding the president and the budget.
Quite frankly, I think he's done excellently the first 100 days. Somebody asked me, what grade would you give him? I said, well, I would give him an A.
What planet is Pelosi on? A budget that reduces taxes, lowers the deficit, and creates jobs. This budget does just the opposite. I don't know. Maybe she was grading on a curve.
Tried to explain to my 8-year-old son the other day about how much is $1 trillion. So I asked him, I said, David, who's the greatest basketball player in the world? And he said, LeBron James. And so we looked it up and we found out that LeBron James makes $40 million a year to play basketball. And so then I asked him, how many seasons would LeBron James have to play basketball at $40 million a season to have $1 trillion? And you know what the answer is? 25,000 seasons. You know, these numbers are gigantic. $1 trillion is $1 million.
All of that comes out of the future earnings of our economy. We all know from our own experience that if you live beyond your means today, by necessity, you'll have to live below your means tomorrow. That's the tomorrow that we're creating for our nation.
That's exactly what we're doing with deficit spending. It's like we are going to the buffet and we are pigging out. And we're getting up and walking out the door without paying, and the next poor bunch of slobs who come through that door are not only going to have to pay for their food, they're going to have to pay for mine, and they didn't even get to eat mine. That's what deficit spending does, and it's, I think, immoral.
It's the dream political match of the century. What if Ronald Reagan, in his prime, could face off against Barack Obama?
Yo, this is George W. Bush.
You know, I probably could have taken on Mr. Obama in the ring. I think they just underestimated me. Look, see? Look at these reflexes. I've had a lot of practice.
Oh! What is your prediction for this fight?
Let me be clear to those couple billion people from all the nations around this planet who must be watching me. With that old man and his discredited free market trickle-down plans.
My prediction is pain. We are here now with Hillary the Hun Clinton. How do you see this fight playing out? Oh, that's playing.
Well, Peanut Boy, I'll have to go with Obama. He's crafty, he's wily, it's almost impossible to pin him down.
And that's just when he's talking. Isn't that right, Hillary? A lot of people are not sure how this fight's going to turn out. How do you feel, Dutch, you'll do against a much younger opponent like Barack Obama?
Well, I'm not going to make age an issue in this fight. I won't hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. I tried just talking to the young man, but he just wouldn't listen.
There you have it, folks. A true American patriot. Looks like the referee has entered the ring.
Oh, goodness, thank you, yes. Joe, long time no see.
Nice.
Hey, ladies. You are both looking lovely tonight. You know, if you want to hang out after this fight is over, I do have a room upstairs.
You pig.
Oh, I did not have...
Save it.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Okay, now listen up. Just like I tell Hillary whenever we start getting into it, I want a fair fight. That means no punching below the belt like she does. It hurts.
Ownership means you're on your own.
That's right. Free from the shackles of high taxes and bureaucrats.
Your tax cuts only went to the wealthiest.
There you go again. High cuts went to all taxpayers. 25% reduction across the board.
You left huge deficits.
That's funny coming from you.
Wow, you know, that had to hurt. No exaggeration to say that the undecides could go either way.
How about 4 words? Winning the Cold War.
How about spread the wealth around?
Shared scarcity.
Creator saved 4 million jobs.
17 million new jobs from 1981 to 89. Unemployment under 5%. Greatest expansion of our economy in United States history.
Wow, maybe I should have ate my broccoli.
There's some trickle down for you.
Socialism.
8,
We need change.
9,
Yes, we can.
10. He's out. I can't believe it. He's down for the count.
There's no getting up from that.
Well, that's one more for the Gipper.
I would like the government to keep my taxes low, get rid of the waste and inefficiency that they have so much of, and protect America. Most important, protect America, I'd say #1.
I expect them to provide me with quality health care. Expect them to provide me with a taxation system where my business can prosper. And I also expect them to do something on the world scene as well in terms of benevolence to other nations.
Well, I actually don't want the government to do more for me because I think they do plenty and they can't even accomplish well what they have on their books.
Stay out of my way, let me keep more of my money, and don't tell me where my kids can go to school.
Better education, create more jobs, and then government specifically, I'd like them to become better role models.
Is there really any doubt at all about what will happen if we let them win this November? Is there any doubt that they will raise our taxes? That they will send inflation into orbit again? That they will make government bigger than ever? And deficits even worse? Raise unemployment? Cut back our defense preparedness? Raise interest rates? And they'll do all that in the name of compassion. It's what they've done to America in the past. But if we do our job right, they won't be able to do it again.
Our current experiment in big government has got to end. We've gone down this path before, and it's always led us as a nation to be less prosperous, more in debt, and ultimately less free. We must put this nation back on a firm foundation, grounded in limited government. And our economy needs to encourage Americans to build and create, not steal their hope for a bright future in which they can achieve their dreams. It is time, as Ronald Reagan said, to reawaken this industrial giant, to get the government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. Let these be our first priorities, and let there be no compromise.
I think if Republicans are able to come up with comprehensive, specific policies that would present an alternative to the radical approach of Barack Obama, which I think they can. And I don't think the same thing's going to happen to Barack Obama. He's not going to be able to govern as a moderate as Bill Clinton was able to do because it's just not in him. He is a liberal. He is an extreme liberal, and he's not going to be able to moderate those sufficiently.
Nothing fails like failure. And historically, the policies that this administration has pursued, for all their talk of being a new, future-oriented party, these are 20th century statist solutions that stem from 19th century bureaucratic and socialistic models that actually stem from 18th century bad French Rousseau philosophy. So track the cesspool's droppings along the way, and what you're going to find is this isn't going to work now any more than it ever did. This is not a progressive Democratic Party. It's a regressive party, way back to the bad failed policies of the 70s and before.
What gives me hope about America is looking back at this country's history. If you see where we've come from, you have a pretty good idea of who we are and a pretty good idea of what we're capable of doing and where we can go. This is a country that should never have existed. I mean, we took on the world's greatest, most well-trained, well-financed army, and we threw that government off of our shoulders in the American Revolution. These were farmers who took muskets off the wall that were better suited for rabbit hunting than fighting a war against the British Army, but miraculously, and I think providentially, we won.
You cannot spend your way out of a recession or borrow your way out of debt. These Americans all have enough sense to know this and came to Washington to let their voices be heard.
Well, the government has just become more and more intrusive into our lives, and with this administration, it's just accelerating.
I just wanted my voice to be heard. It seems that the politicians in Washington are not listening to the people.
Let us stand and fight for freedom.
I couldn't be more excited about the advent of the Tea Party movement, because the left can create a crowd, you know, at the drop of a hat, but conservatives, distilled down to their essence, are individualists. And individuals like to go about their daily lives and like to raise their families and tend to keep to themselves and don't think of themselves as a collective. The Tea Party movement is a manifestation of conservatives who have been pushed too hard for too long, who have been called the worst possible names in the book, and the American people have finally said enough. And I think that the Tea Party movement is the beginning of a much larger movement of civic participation from people who have otherwise gone about their business day in and day out and avoided the political process.
So I've been a little amused over the last couple of days where people have been having these rallies about taxes. You would think they would be saying thank you.
And conservative people generally don't amass like this, but I think we feel so threatened right now, and our country is under such attack right now, that it's causing this to happen. People are coming out.
I'm here because I want the government back to the people. I'm tired of the people in Washington thinking that we work for them, they work for us.
You know, I just hope that we could get back to following the Constitution. As simple as that sounds, you know, government has a primary responsibility to protect our life, our liberty, and our property, and really nothing else. And now we've made government in charge of trying to provide all sorts of things at other taxpayers' expense, and I don't think it can be sustained.
I'm very optimistic about America's future because I believe that within our framing, there are some fundamental truths that will always come to the forefront. I believe in traditional values, and I believe in limited role of government. And what's happening now with all of the discussions over should we be a socialistic state, people are starting to reassess the role of government.
And so I hope that individuals who are out there now who might be kind of watching from the sideline, who are wondering and looking for a great future, understand that they need to get engaged. Because as the government continues to overspend, as we continue to overregulate, we are taking their choices away from them. And that's going to be a very sad day if they don't have the same kind of opportunities I had, or my parents had, or my grandparents had for their kids and their kids.
What I would have to say to my generation is that we have a lot of work to do. And the people who have come before us, the great patriots, you know, back when our country was first being founded, they literally shed blood and they died for this country. We have a lot to be thankful for, but we have a lot of work to do.
To spend money today and expect our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's children to pay for this enormous spending binge that's going on in Washington right now. I mean, my goodness, no great nation passes its costs on to their children and grandchildren. We want to hand over to our children a better country, not an indebted country that's bankrupt.
You know, there was a cover story in Newsweek magazine. The cover story was, "We are all socialists now." Well, the heck we are. We are a freedom-loving people. We've known that there's been that tension between the bigness of the state and individual liberty. And we're seeing that played out right now in America. And those who want to have prosperity must understand prosperity comes when free men and free women and free markets create wealth and create opportunity.
So I would encourage people never to get distressed. I would encourage them never to be dispirited or despair or become disconsolate. You have to make your voice heard. It does still work. The government is still your servant, and the only thing that can stop it from remaining your servant is your silence.
We keep coming back because we are a resilient country, in part because we have an amazingly simple yet workable government that functions with checks and balances so that you don't put too much power in one branch over the other, and you always maintain that the people are ultimately in charge and still have the power to yank the chain. What Americans need to do is yank the chain and do it real quick and real hard.
This country has to get back to a fundamental belief that our liberty comes from God, and therefore we have an obligation to God to be good citizens. And we have to recognize that a free country requires free people who stand on their own 2 feet, have a good work ethic, take care of each other when necessary, come together as a community when necessary. But in the end, it's up to us as individual Americans to come together to create a better America. It's not up to the government to try to impose on us the government's version of a better America. And I think it's very important to recognize that the very base of our liberty is that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Nobody can take them away from us. We're the only country in the world that says your personal sovereignty comes from God, and then you loan power to the state, which means, in the end, every American's always morally responsible for the future of America. You can't give that away. You can't turn it to Obama. You can't give it to the next Republican. In the end, 305 million people each have a moral responsibility to God to help this country remain the freest in the world.
America stands at a crossroad. It all comes down to this. Do we really want to grow government, or do we want to grow ourselves into the people that God created us to be? Remember, it's your money they're spending.
Recognizing the equality of all men and women, we're willing and able to lift the weak, cradle those who hurt, and nurture the bonds that tie us together as a nation, one nation under God. Finally, every promise, every opportunity is still golden in this land. And through that golden door, our children can walk into tomorrow with the knowledge that no one can be denied the promise that is America. Her heart is full, her door is still golden, her future bright. She has arms big enough to comfort and strong enough to support. For the strength in her arms is the strength of her people. In this springtime of hope, some lights seem eternal. America's is. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless you.
By the way, in the time it has taken you to watch this film, the national debt has increased by an estimated $182 million. It's time for a real change.
Uncle Sam has come to call, to take a bit from Peter to give to Paul. Drop by drop, he'll bleed you dry. It's not cash, just stimuli. Pay the man, pay the toll. Put everybody on the door. What's yours is mine, and when that's gone, we'll print some more and party on. I want your money, change has come. He wants your money, nowhere to run. We want your money, I have a plan for a brave new world. There's change ahead.
My fellow Americans,
I am pleased to tell you I just signed legislation which outlaws Russia forever. The bombing begins in 5 minutes.
I was under medication when I made the decision to burn the tapes.
Every week we don't pass a stimulus package. 500 million Americans lose their jobs.
We'll tax the rich to save the poor. The rich won't mind working more. We got rules and regs with you in mind. No banker will be left behind. Spread the wealth is what we say. The old ideals are so passé. Pursue your dreams but not too hard. The IRS is in your yard. I want your money, change has come. He wants your money, nowhere to run. We want your money, I have a plan for a brave new world, there's change ahead.
Politics gives guys so much power that they tend to behave badly around women. And I hope I never get into that.
What do you think a stimulus is? It's spending. That's the whole point. Seriously.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.
We'll take good care